Hi everyone. Welcome to this special Revolutionary Change virtual event of Mission Abolition. It includes the streaming of tonight's film, Reimagining Safety, and will be followed up with a live stream tomorrow, Saturday, January 31st, from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, of 3 panel discussions consisting of experts, some of whom were featured in the film. I'd like to start this program with the following definition. Abolition is the act of formally ending a system, practice, or institution, most famously the movement to end slavery, but also contemporary efforts to dismantle prisons, policing, and other oppressive structures by building community-led alternatives to punishment and transforming society towards liberation. I understand people's, especially white people's, sense of fear and insecurity around the idea of police abolition. The idea that the police are there to protect us and keep us safe has been programmed into all of us through endless streams of movie and television propaganda. My first official introduction to the police was in elementary school when we were given a coloring book about Officer Friendly, who was a helpful and oh-so-friendly neighborhood police officer. There was never any discussion about the nature of policing, the rules they are supposed to follow, or anything that would empower us as citizens to hold Officer Friendly accountable. We were simply taught that police were there to help us and that our only job was to obey them. It would not be until I was an adult that I would see how my understanding of the role of the police was completely manipulated by both my privilege and the incessant propaganda, or rather copaganda, efforts of our oppressor that convinced me that our system of policing was the only way we could be safe. And of course, as someone who was raised in a very insulated and privileged community, it never occurred to me that my understanding and experience with policing was completely different from that of people with less privilege. It has taken me the better part of my adult life to reach this place of understanding. Understanding that the role of policing has never been what we were taught it was. It has never been about protecting us, the regular people. Policing has always been about protecting property and capital on behalf of the empire. Their job is to protect the property of the oppressor class by any and all means necessary. Their job is not now, nor has it ever been, to keep us safe. They are merely the foot soldiers of the empire. We have been so ingrained about the necessity of law enforcement, as if the current system is the only way we can be safe. Every crime committed is sensationalized and used to further this bias in favor of more policing. People are always most willing to ignore violations of their civil liberties when they are scared for their safety. It is a vicious cycle that will never end because it is not based on reason and logic. If increased policing kept us safe, we would be the safest country on the planet. I think that if people think about that, they know that that's true. Even when violent crime is on a downward trend, which it has been for decades, the empire will still convince us that we need more policing to keep us safe. Yet approximately only 4% of police-reported crimes are the types of violent crimes that we are all concerned about. Homicide, assault, rape, and robbery make up about 4% of police-reported crime. So what constitutes the other 96% of people caught in the web of law enforcement? Who are these dangerous people that can somehow only be managed by armed guards? These are predominantly people whose predicaments are the result of poverty, addiction, mental illness, and other causes that would be best served by a myriad of other social services that do not include the police. So why are we so dependent on the police to manage situations for which they are neither trained nor equipped? We have watched for generations as any type of social safety net has been eroded and critical services have been defunded. Make no mistake, this has been very intentional. The dismantling of social services in favor of increased law enforcement is both profitable in the short term and pragmatic in the long term for the oligarchs that need to keep us in line as the empire is growing increasingly hostile towards us. This documentary that we are streaming tonight, Reimagining Safety, by my friend Matthew Solomon, is not only a great introduction to the concept of abolition, but also presents a new paradigm for us to consider. A system wherein we care for each other and keep each other safe, as was done for thousands of years before the existence of state-sponsored stormtroopers. I do not expect people, especially people who share my privilege, to have some great epiphany and become abolitionists overnight. I simply ask that you watch this film, and as you maybe begin to reimagine safety, you may also be able to reimagine a better world for all of us. But it is my belief that in the same way there can be no peace without justice, there can be no revolution without abolition. All power to the people.
The people in power don't want you to know about this, especially right now, especially any of the apps. But I happen to be a weed, not a seed.
If you ask any Palestinian in the world today where they're from, most of the time they'll give you the name of a city or a village that existed prior to 1948.
A land without people for people without a land. This was a complete fabrication, it was a complete lie.
Judaism has been hijacked. And the other lie is that you need Israel to make Jews safe.
Come to Israel. We'll show you around. We'll explain to you why you're wrong. And so I did go. I went a couple years later, and oh my God, it was worse than I could have ever imagined it to be.
It's a genocide. It's a genocide because every single, institution like Amnesty International, like Human Rights Watch, these institutions have called it a genocide.
Gaza is America. Gaza is a laboratory.
The bombs are still falling. Schools haven't divested.
Reoccupation! Shut it down! Border wall! Shut it down!
Justice for Gaza is justice for us all.
In the moment like that, we are connected to a broader struggle.
We have the power of the monkey wrench. We have to organize our communities to defend ourselves against the white supremacist construct that is the national security state.
There was a massive onslaught and attack on these students at the encampment.
Everybody has to resist. Everybody has to stand up because they came for us today, but they'll come for you tomorrow.
When I think of a free Palestine, I do think of collective liberation. Those two things are completely intertwined for me.
Palestinians, like any other people, just want to live a normal life. Putting in your destination on Google Maps and not seeing a checkpoint.
I often say that there's been a seed of consciousness that's been planted in everybody.
When you asking Palestinians what they want, they've literally said, I want to play on a playground. I want to go to school.
I ask myself this question all the time. I wonder why it is so controversial for me to advocate for Palestinian freedom, Palestinian liberation. Why is it so controversial?
Everybody stand up! George Floyd! George Floyd! Justice! Now! Justice! Now!
The first thing you have to do is stop. You cannot reform this.
George Floyd!
You know, we've been sold this false choice of policing or nothing, which has been used to terrorize people into accepting policing when there's a whole long list of things that they would rather have that they know would help address the problems in their communities.
Policing isn't just about the police, it's about like land and territory, it's about resources, it's about who's seen as a member of the public, it's about property, very inherently about capitalism and property, protecting white people's property, all of these things, right? And you can't understand that if you don't understand the history of your country.
A lot of our mistakes in the past have come from our conceptual errors. Like we had a conception of justice for 50 years that gave us racialized mass incarceration in the new Jim Crow, a conception of justice rooted in retribution, retaliation, and revenge.
Looking at our entire system through a lens of rehabilitation and prevention will completely alter the DNA of our criminal legal system. And frankly, I think it would take us to a place that I would call it a criminal justice system. I've purposely taken justice out of it because I believe that a system that has so many injustices cannot be called the justice system.
The way that we can create public safety in a way that serves everyone is by agreeing that everyone deserves to be safe. Because we don't really believe that right now.
Race in this country has never really been removed from the political dialogue. We still continue to live the vestiges of slavery, and I know that people get sometimes offended when I make that statement, but the reality is that we have.
Because we won't reckon with our past, because we will let older people say, oh, that's so old, and let's not talk about that anymore. Slavery was so long ago. We haven't had it for 200 years. This is, not realizing that we never reckoned, we never repaired any of it at all. So now we're here. So we're finally getting these glimpses of folks speaking out, right? Critical race theory. The reason that has to get shut down is because, again, it's acknowledging the birth defects of this country.
We sort of transferred the process of legalized slavery by indebted servitude and having people, just being property, and we converted that, and eventually we did this through housing practices and, public health practice and education. And then the criminal legal system came into play on a big way. And it always played a role, by the way. It played a role even post-slavery in the way that so many of the laws were created and policing was really built around.
People want to grasp onto, well, not all police are bad, right? And I have to remind folks, it isn't about the individual police officer at all. It's about the institution of policing that is rotten to its core. And it's rotten to its core because of what it was born out of. It was a slave catching unit. So you have a profession now, which is a handed down profession, right? Like often police officers, it's their cousins, their uncles, their nephews, their children. These are jobs that you're kind of born into. So if you go back in the lineage of policing, you're going to find that those folks were slave catchers, right? And Klan members. So it should be no surprise that this is where we are 100 years later. And a matter of reform and more money for policing, all while increased militarization of policing is never going to yield any different results. And part of my frustration on the campaign trail was, you know, other folks running for mayor don't want to talk about the root causes of why we're here.
Yeah, my journey to teaching law came through my experience as an 8-year-old when I was introduced to the majesty of the law in a Breonna Taylor-style raid on our home. Door was kicked in, phalanx of officers came in, my 7 siblings and I were lined up. My 6'8" dad, who I thought was indomitable, was down on the floor, prostrate. And the next time I saw him upright was on Family Day at the Ohio State Penitentiary. He was given 22 to 55 for possession and sale of marijuana, because that's how they brought down uppity black men back in those days. He was looking at all 55 of those years, except that he was able to reach up on the warden's shelves and pull down his law books, teach himself con law, criminal procedure, criminal law, and represented himself pro se, wrote his own writs of habeas corpus, and triumphed in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeal, which handed down a decision that said something you would have thought would have been established well before his case, that it's a denial of a defendant's due process for the state through its prosecutor to deliberately lie to a jury to get a conviction.
You know, all of my friends when I was growing up, most of them, almost all of them, never had their dads around, you know, didn't have a father figure. And that's why, you know, we were running the streets. You know, that's why we were stealing, you know, drinking, you know, experimenting with drugs and stuff like that, because I feel like it's important to have that role model, you know, that I had. I was privileged to have, you know, I was blessed to have, you know. And so what I realized that all of their dads were in jail. All of them were locked up, or they were, you know, addicted, you know, to drugs, or, you know, had anger issues because they were alcoholics and stuff, but they didn't have the help. There weren't a lot of rehab programs, there weren't a lot of resources and different opportunities, even for young people like me. And it was just a vicious cycle, really, you know. It was, as a therapist, I noticed that trauma and how it's intergenerational. That intergenerational trauma is very impactful. You know, if you don't, you know, have that support, that safety net from your community, then, you know, you just fall into this kind of pit of self-destruction, like I said, you know.
There's an inverse relationship in safety and incarceration. There is a period in the very early stages where incarceration may play a role as you're removing someone from society, but at some point, actually, the reverse starts to occur, where now you have the factors of the likelihood of you engaging in crime go up. So when people get released, and by the way, 95% of the people that are incarcerated come back out, you're being released and you don't have good opportunities for employment. More than likely, you may not have housing. And, you know, your alternatives are very limited. And on top of that, you know, sort of engaging in criminal behavior has become the norm for you, and you are more likely to commit crimes. So when you, again, going back to the question of incarceration and the value of it, it's not a deterrent, likely to increase crime for at least a cycle, a period of time in the individual. It's very costly financially. It creates a lot of social displacement. You have families now where you may not have the father presence with the kids, which leads to, you know, problems further down the line. All those factors for me start to play a role in my decision as to why, generally speaking, incarceration should be a very limited option, and it should be an option that is used with a very surgically with an eye towards actually rehabilitation and release.
It's really crazy out here.
Hear me clearly. The streets belong to the people. People aren't used to freedom, so freedom is this new experience. The ability to live like without the fear of the law. Look at all these fearless people.
I was born into social justice, right? This fight for social justice. If you look at my birthday, I was born on April 4th. That's the day in a different year. Martin Luther King Jr. died. Maya Angelou was born on my birthday. Adam Clayton Powell Jr., he died on my birthday in a different year. So my birthday is significant in Black American, African American history. And my parents actually met at a civil rights rally. My dad let her walk out at their high school. My mother, who was going to Black Panther meetings at the time, saw what was going on. She looked out of the window. He was like, "Hey girl, we're protesting, come on down." They went downstairs, and she went downstairs. My aunt introduced them, and the rest is Black history, right? What they were protesting was they fought for an African American studies class, and then they brought a white teacher in, to teach Black kids about their history. And we thought that was really inappropriate. They thought it was inappropriate, so they fought and they won. So, I'm an activism baby, I guess. This country is totally happy with violent white supremacists killing Black people, right? Or killing Jewish people. They are indifferent to our sufferings. They might act like they care. Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter to me. They may act like they care, but no one really cares about us. So when you hear people say "back the blue," then you also read the subtitle and it says "keep those niggas in line." They're happy with it.
As I looked more and more into the history of policing and looked firsthand at policing around the world, certain continuities emerge. Police are violence workers. Even if they're not carrying guns, even if they rarely shoot people, at the center of that institution is the capacity and authorization to use violence on behalf of state interests. And that leads to kind of the other continuity, which is that police have always played a central role in propping up a status quo that has winners and losers. And police have been a tool for maintaining the advantages of the winners. And so there's a famous 19th century saying, the law in its majesty forbids both the rich and the poor from sleeping under bridges, stealing bread, and begging in the streets. So even seemingly neutral laws around property crime, for instance, as enforced in the modern world, the burden of that falls on the already most vulnerable, the already most left out populations. And policing has always played that role.
So a lot of the history that people believe only belongs to the Southern United States is part of the history of Nova Scotia segregation. And that, of course, is accompanied by policing and years and generations and centuries of white supremacist violence and terrorism in this province towards a historic Black population. Part of the problem in Canada is that we always displace everything that's happening onto the States, and specifically the US South, and then believe that it doesn't happen in Canada. We don't have those same histories. So fighting things like policing is perhaps more difficult in Canada, or difficult in its own way, because we have to fight through the idea that Black people even exist in Canada. Like we're even a thing, that racism exists, and that police actually do brutalize us. We just had a recent report in Toronto, a use of force and strip search report that showed that Black people, and this is adjusted for race, all the numbers, 20 times more likely to be shot by the police, like compared to white people, and 1.6 times more likely to be strip searched. And, you know, like, you keep getting all these numbers. In Halifax, we had a report, the Wortley report, that showed that Black people is 6 times more likely to be stopped by the police for a street check, what we call street checks, what people call stop and frisk or carding. So, you know, these are all things that exist, but it's taken us years to kind of prove it, because there's always been an idea that that doesn't happen here.
One of the points that you'll hear sometimes, both Black and white critics of the criminal justice system showing any leniency, what they view as leniency towards wrongdoers, is they'll say, well, wait a minute, you know, choice. You have choice. When you exercise choice, you can't blame any of the surrounding circumstances or structural factors or systemic things. You made a choice. When you exercise your will, when you make a choice, then it's about personal responsibility, and you leave out systemic and structural factors. You hear that over and over again. And this is one of the reasons I said theory matters, and we have to address that at its root. And here's how we start to address that at its root. You know, I don't talk about this much, but you know, while we're on this subject, as a result of my dad's incarceration, my mom took her own life. Now, again, a lot of people may say that's self-destruction. That's not social oppression, her taking her life by her own hand, right? But one of the things that Durkheim brought home to us as one of the founders of sociology was that you can take what looks like a very personal choice. Let's go to suicide. This was his famous work, Suicide. You can take what looks like a very private, personal choice that's only a response to one's own demons. But if you look at it in a systemic way for the patterns that emerge from collective activity, and what you see is it's not a private choice at all. That suicides in some societies are high, in some societies they're non-existent. In societies in which suicides happen, some groups have a lot of them each year, some groups have hardly any of them each year. And those rates of suicide, those different rates of suicide are stable from year to year. You can bet on them. You know they're going to happen from year to year. So suicide itself is as much, if not more, a social fact than a psychological act. And you erase the social context when you just focus on the personal choice part. Take Sandra Bland.
Get out!
Wow.
Now!
Wow.
Get out of the car!
For a failure to signal. You're doing all of this for
Get
a
over there!
Right, yeah. Yeah, let's take this to court. Let's do
Go ahead.
For a failure.
Perhaps she committed suicide. The police have contended that she has. I'm going to assume that she did for the sake of further analysis. Let's assume that she took her own life. But that act of self-destruction was preceded by one of social oppression, and the act of social oppression is what precipitated the self-destruction, and so is responsible for the self-destruction. When that police officer wrongfully pulled her over, pulled her out of the car, and spirit murdered her on the side of that road, humiliated this proud Black woman, degraded her, threw her in a jumpsuit in a cage, right? That social oppression led to her act of, you may want to call it self-destruction, but that self-destruction, the seeds of it were planted by the social oppression, and the social oppression is directly responsible for it.
So I was with LAPD for 11 years, and I started off as patrol. Then I later worked in detective division, doing the auto detectives, which is working with vehicles. Then I later moved on to working undercover. Then I finished out working for the city attorney's office as a liaison for domestic violence. What led me to LAPD was basically I wanted to be a detective. Law & Order was like my favorite show, and I really liked the fact that solving what I thought were, huge crimes for people would be a benefit to them and me, because I'm just have a caring type of heart. So I was like, this is something interesting, so let me figure out how to do this. So the only way to do this was to become an officer. And then you have to promote, and you have to take interviews, and you have to do several different things before you can actually become a detective. It was nothing like I thought it would be. From day one, when you go into the academy, you're being brainwashed, you're being yelled at. You're gonna get in line, you're gonna get straight, and you're gonna do what we tell you to do. You're learning how to take orders. You're learning how to address victims, suspects, mostly suspects, and you're learning tactics. You're learning shooting. You have to get tased. You have to get pepper spray in your eyes. You have to go through all of that just to make it through. You have to shoot every 2 weeks for training. And when you start training, it's every day. Like, that was like a really big challenge for me, because you have to wrap your mind around hurting someone with a gun. They try to veer away from emotional processes. It's the high stress, because you gotta shoot well, and you gotta know why. And so, that was a very stressful time for me. And then after that, throughout the academy, you get tased. And tasing was like a big deal, because everybody has to get tased. And then they had this crazy game where, guys would try to hold out as long as they can until they said, ow. Like, I didn't understand that either. I was just like, it's almost like Disneyland for cops. And then once you get out in the real world, it's nothing like that. You're actually talking to real people. You're talking to real suspects. These aren't somebody acting. This is not a cop. This is not your boss that's acting like a suspect. This is somebody you need to get to know, to the bottom of, to talk to. In the end, like towards the end of the academy, right when you're about to graduate, we have these little scenarios that they'll do. And then that's when they want you to start talking to the victim or talking to the suspect, because you don't know if it's a suspect or not yet. And for me, that got my wheels turning, like, yeah, we're not gonna know what we're walking into. So where is the more training like this? You just have to make a split decision. And not everybody's ready to make a split decision, but that is what you're gonna encounter once you get out there. And they give us such a small little test at the end. So
in the academy, they don't really teach you how to deal with people.
Not really.
There's a desire to try to remake policing to be more like social work, more reliant on dialogue and good communication skills, more focused on a kind of procedural justice that involves more openness, transparency, and communication with the public. And this sounds very good on the surface, right? When we have an encounter with a police officer at a traffic stop, we want to be treated with some courtesy, professionalism, and respect. But this kind of ignores the actual functional nature of the vast majority of policing, which is that they're there to micromanage the lives of vulnerable, suspect, and demonized populations. They're there to intimidate young people. They're there to harass homeless people. They're there to drive drug dealers off a street corner. And that is, in essence, about the mobilization of coercion and violence. And that is why departments spend all their effort in the training process focused on that mobilization of violence, because when push comes to shove, that is what is at the heart of policing. And if we want social workers, if we want mental health workers, if we want school counselors to go out and solve problems, then we should hire those people and not police.
And when you're fresh out of the academy, and this happened to me, you go somewhere and somebody's trying to talk to you, and then you just, you bark at them, and you don't even know why you barked at them. Like, when even my, I still remember I barked at this young lady, and I was fresh out. I was like probably my 5th day out of the academy, and he was like, wow, you didn't have to talk to her like that, even though he's been drilling me to do that to everybody. Don't look at anybody, don't do this, don't do that. And I still remember that. And I feel horrible because that wasn't me. That was my training. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm okay.
I worked in South Central Los Angeles. I worked with youth who are houseless. I worked with youth who, had, again, addiction problems, deal with substance use issues. And I work with youth in foster care. I mean, I think that all of those things are a result of policing and the carceral system. Like, a lot of them would tell me that, they would get harassed by the police because they were sleeping on the street. They had run out of time at the shelter they were at, for example. And a lot of them would say that, they would stop them for no reason just because of how they dress or who they were with. If someone had been stopped in the past, then they would always recognize them and again, just for no reason, ask them, questions, give them the 3rd degree, right? So all of this creates anxiety, right? It creates a intense kind of feeling of paranoia. It creates this sense of insecurity and low self-esteem, because if you're not, again, lifted up as a human being, then the opposite's gonna happen. It's gonna be detrimental. And so I dealt with a lot of anxiety diagnosis, social anxiety diagnosis, depression, and again, all rooted in the way that policing affects young Black and brown people of color. Mm-hmm.
I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, and I went to a school where my best friends were Black. They would have experiences with police that I wouldn't. And then they would go home and tell their parents, and their parents would tell them that they're lucky that's all that happened for things they didn't do. I knew, because I come from a family of lawyers, that we have all these rights. And when I would go home and do something, even if I was guilty, there was still like a law and a process. And it really clued me into the issues that people are treated differently. I started learning about checkpoints in 2011, and I found that the checkpoints were being used to target Hispanics in like Chula Vista and Escondido. I went to San Diego State, and I actually went to these checkpoints. Because I was going to checkpoints and advocating that I thought they were wrong, I would hold signs in front of the checkpoint. It would say checkpoint ahead. That's when I had an interaction with an officer where he drove up on his motorcycle and he says, put your sign down. And when I asked why, he said, you can answer why in fucking jail. I told you to put your sign down. I did go home that night, but it was after that I realized that any interaction that I would have with an officer, or even when I would see officers, that I would start filming them, because I was shocked at his response to me. And I believe that that's something that the people should know.
What's your name? Does it matter? Okay. You need to leave the area. I do. My car is there. You're not going to go to your car. We told you to leave over an hour ago. You didn't go. So you can either walk that way right now, or we're going to arrest you. You were going to let me leave if I told you my name? You failed the attitude test, and you are subject to arrest. That's a First Amendment right to not tell you my name. I just want to go to my car. I haven't done anything different. You told me to stand here. Arrest him. What are you doing?
So I'm out as often filming police as often as I see them. The reality is if I go to the market right now and I see someone pulled over, especially brown or Black person, I'm pulling over and I'm gonna film that stop until it's done. I do find that when I am filming police, in interactions, especially when they are talking to brown and black people, that the investigation seems to be expedited. And I've seen situations where they're searching someone's car, I go to film, and soon enough, all the stuff's going back in the car and they're letting the person go. I think that happens more times than not. And that's where it's no question is providing transparency with police a benefit to the public. It's without doubt.
One time, I was on a call and it was child abuse. And child abuse basically takes a very long time to investigate and to get details on, and you have to remove kids at that moment if you suspect something to a certain level. According to my training officer, they said one thing, but I know the child said something different. But because he's my training officer and he's my supervisor for that, for the time being, I have to go with what he says. So I started noticing that a lot with different stuff. Like, okay, so you're gonna say this on your report, but this is what actually happened. You write it like this, Kennedy, because this is how we write this. It's not specifically for what happened. And so that was happening on a small scale and on large scales. And then I became an undercover officer who was investigating other officers. So that really opened my eyes into what they do investigate and what they don't. And what we were investigating were things that, in my opinion, was just human being stuff. Like people, okay, yeah, they do stuff, but it's not criminal. They're not hurting anybody, but okay, yeah, it's against our policy and they're off duty. The stuff that they should be investigating, or the team, because the team that actually investigated the hardcore stuff, like if a cop killed someone or like really bad stuff, like that was, done differently, I could say. They had a way of doing it, and they only let certain people in that type of group because you had to have a mindset like, you're not trying to burn this cop, but we have to find out what happened type thing. So in these types of divisions or departments or whatever you want to call it, they're exclusive. They're not gonna let anybody in. And why is it like that? Because they're hiding something, obviously. You gotta go along to get along, is what the name of the game is.
Internal affairs is a mechanism for protecting the image of the department, not producing justice, not getting rid of bad cops. It's about image management. And so they want to conduct investigations so that they can minimize the harm to the department, either by excusing harmful behavior, putting it under the carpet, or they will throw an officer under the bus, such as Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis.
Today, a jury in Minnesota found former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts in the murder of George Floyd last May.
Normally, we see departments go to the mat to protect officers from charges of misconduct, except when the misconduct is so terrible that it threatens the institution itself. So what we saw in Minneapolis was the department itself training officers, the chief, testifying against the officer, because they understood that in order to protect the institution, they had to sacrifice that officer.
It's not a good feeling to be in that type of environment all the time when you're constantly questioning your ethics, you're constantly checking your morals. Do I throw my morals out and just do the job? Do I forget about my integrity, even though integrity is one of the things you have to be like really good at as a cop. But who has integrity around here is what I kept finding myself saying. After I had a baby, you know, I found it back. And I was like, I'm not teetering for anyone anymore. And so that's when I found a job that actually gave me hours where I could actually be a mom and help out my family. And then that's when I had to leave, because my family, my sanity, and my children are the most important thing to me.
I journeyed from reformer to revolutionary when it comes to criminal justice matters. I started as a reformer thinking that, you know, we're talking about bad apples, and that's how I initially kind of processed the problem. Even going back to Rodney King, you could look at those officers beating Rodney King as bad officers. There were 4 of them who were tried in Simi Valley, even though there were a lot of other officers standing around watching the beating going on as well. But you could still call that a bad apples issue. And taking it forward now to the Black Lives Matter movement, which was taking the Rodney King incident, even the videotape police misconduct part, but now you have it going on with the cell phone, and here comes the procession of hashtags. And with each hashtag comes another reform. I remember it vividly. You know, we'd see a hashtag, and it would involve a police officer shooting someone who was running away. And we say, more training, better training, that'll help to prevent that. Then we see another police officer do something egregious, and we say, well, that might have to do with community policing. We need to take a community policing model. And then there'd be another atrocity, and we'd say, well, body cams certainly would help to solve a lot of those issues. Implicit bias training. We went through one after the other until we got to the George Floyd case.
I'm able to go.
And in George Floyd, the Minneapolis Police Department had all of the reforms. They had the body cams. They had the implicit bias training. They had the de-escalation training. They had the community policing. They had that and more, everything you could imagine. And not only did you have not only one officer involved in the killing of George Floyd, right, but the others who stood back.
Please. Please let me stay in. No, please, man, I can't breathe.
Just again, back to Rodney King, right? But a year later, you had Dante Wright killed, right, by the officer who was eventually convicted of his killing. Right? In this police department that was supposed to be one of the exemplars of reform. So it became abundantly evident that reform is not the solution here. And it isn't the solution for a number of reasons. One, police officers cannot train their way out of unconscious anti-Black bias. I used to think they could. I used to think that one of the things you could do with police officers is train them out of their anti-Black bias. I was one of the early writers in critical race theory on unconscious bias. I moved it from a Freudian analysis, took it over to kind of the social cognition area where we had replicable studies that you could go into the laboratory and identify unconscious bias in its very operation. And I even in my most recent scholarship have been looking at other kinds of research that is focused on brain imaging. And when I did my early work on unconscious bias, we didn't have the brain imaging studies. Now we have them. And we're able to say, here's your brain on race. And we're able to see how it operates. And what we see is that at the unconscious level, there's this bias, no doubt, but that there's very little we can do about it.
Body cams should have worked. It should have provided transparency. The problem is the people pay for the body cams, and then where does that footage go? It goes to the police. We first have to trust that the officer is going to wear the body cam. Actually, back it up. We first have to trust that we can get body cams in a department anywhere in the country. Some departments don't have body cams. Once the body cams are administered in a department, we have to trust that the department will use them, that the officers will then put them on when they're working, that the officers, if it's physically on, will turn it on when they're in the interaction, and that when after the interaction, that they'll be transparent with the footage. If any of those things don't happen, that the body cams and our advocacy to make sure that police have body cams, unfortunately, was a waste.
How come you have your body camera on, but most of you don't? Like, how come his isn't on?
Our body cams only get on when we have act.
I know, but yours is standby, right?
Yeah.
Why is yours not on standby?
Yeah.
Could you put it on standby?
Sure.
Please. Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
A lot of them have their cameras off. They want to get away with it, but we ain't gonna let that shit happen.
Quintanilla, Sanchez. Can you turn that on? Sanchez doesn't have his body cam on. Sanchez doesn't have his body camera on.
Make Sanchez turn on his fucking body.
Thank you.
They got phones, badges, and rides.
Where's their body cam, champ?
No, it's at the station. I ran out.
Policing, like I said, it's not just a practice, meaning that like when we encounter the police, yeah, they're arresting us, but it's also an ideology. It's how people think, right? And the idea of believing in punishment, that there are bad people and good people, and then who needs to be punished, which is really a question of who's not seen as a member of the public, which historically has been Black people, Indigenous people, drug users, people with disabilities, people with mental health problems, sex workers, queer and trans people. All of these groups are seen as outside the public, immigrants, whoever, right? And that's what makes us the people who need to be policed, the people who are outside the thin blue line, the people that thin blue line is holding back, right? That line between chaos. We are the chaos. So unless you shift how people think about that and ask people to really think about, like, why do you call police when someone's asking for change outside Tim Hortons? Why do you think the police are an appropriate mechanism when somebody's living in a tent?
We are taught to call 911 before we're taught to speak. Like, it's the first thing we're taught to do. I mean, white people call 911 because their neighbor's making noise. The trash can's in the wrong place. There's a dead squirrel in their yard. We call 911 for everything. So, as that progressed as our way of being, the police budget grew and grew and grew. And when I tell people that the LAPD's budget has grown 52% in the last 10 years, that's a shocking number because no other line item has done that. Youth development doesn't even register on the graph. It gets so little. Yet here we are concerned about youth coming from other neighborhoods and stealing our belongings. Yet we give no money to youth development.
I also think that, there's an avoidance of accountability. Interestingly enough, a carceral system perpetuates lack of accountability. It makes it easy to not be accountable because we don't make people accountable, we just lock them up. We don't make them change anything, and we don't make the system change anything.
Why are we so carceral? Why are we so focused on punishment and more punishment?
I think there's a combination of things. We were pretty much on par with the rest of the world, and I'm talking by the rest of the world. I'm talking about mostly industrialized democracies until the early 70s, and then by the late 70s, early 80s, the conversation around crime became very politicized, right? And there were political candidates that really found a path to elections and to grabbing the attention of voters. At the same time, we started to experience an increase in the use of narcotics. And then by the early 80s, we were full-blown, the epidemic of crack and the wars that were being caused by gangs, and then we engaged in this whole concept of the war on drugs. And as we became more fearful and it became more politicized, we became more carceral. It was like we couldn't get enough of it, right? We sort of went into a drinking binge, about, believing that the more carceral that we were, the more punitive that we were, the more safety we can achieve. A lot of it was a result of people being fearful, but I think more than anything else, it was what I consider the unethical manipulation of information by people that were, involved in race for political office. And then I think that as that process started to prove as a good path for successful, outcomes in electoral races, we also started to develop an industry around this, right? So, we started to have more prisons being built. The concept of private prisons surfaced. We started to create larger and larger police departments. We started to increase the resources that were being placed in this entire mechanism around policing, prosecution, and incarceration. When 3 strikes came into operationally in the state of California, our incarceration rates skyrocketed. We went from, if you consider at the beginning of the 1970s, we were incarcerating under 30,000 people in the state of California in the state prison system. And by the 1997, after 3 strikes, we were up to about 190,000 people. And we use, and when I say people use strategically very tragic events to create this very draconian laws. And so I think that it was a combination of politics, economics, and fear. And they all came together. And, frankly, one of my fears is we're kind of in that place today in many ways.
How do you get the community to move away from an ideology of punishment to thinking differently? So how, when we've grown up on the Mounties and, all the cop shows, like 50% of fictional content on TV in a year is crime shows, right? Something like 30% of all content that we consume is crime-based. So between the news, between like reality shows on crime, between fictional crime detective stories, all this, we consume this huge amount of crime content. We have cop Lego, we have the Paw Patrol dog, and then we have the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And this has been a long-term symbol of Canada. The RCMP myth, this the red coat, the horses, but the RCMP is actually, of course, formed as the Northwest Mounted Police, the Northwest being the frontier. So they're putting down Indigenous people, they're committing genocide on Indigenous people, they're pushing white settlement out to the north, all of this. So this is a social idea, and it's very hard to get people to move from that common sense idea that we need the police stop bad guys. If we get rid of the police, there'll be crime all over the place, right? So we are you have to have that conversation.
The police and their supporters are actively producing all kinds of positive misrepresentations of policing. Some of the earliest police shows on television were co-produced by the LAPD. And some of the most popular, long-lasting shows on television, like Cops, are also co-produced by police departments. And local media, television, newspapers always seem to treat police sources as above reproach, immediately accept whatever they say as gospel, almost never bring in a critical counter perspective. And in addition, politicians have come to rely on police to solve a whole set of political problems for them, to demonize their enemies, to cover up their failures. And so they also have a vested interest in producing these positive narratives about policing that portray police as this thin blue line that separates the good people from the bad people, that is the force that protects civilization through the seemingly neutral enforcement of a set of laws that somehow magically benefit everyone equally. And so we are bombarded 24 hours a day with television shows, lionizing police who can do no wrong, who even when they break the rules, they're doing it for the right reasons, to help keep us safe and all the rest. And this both undermines basic concerns about civil liberties, but it also warps our sense of what really is necessary to produce safe and healthy communities and a safe and sustainable society. It just erases the potential of other kinds of interventions that we need to provide real safety and security.
Let's just be clear that police, prisons, carcerality, it started for the explicit purpose of controlling, enslaving, kidnapping, keeping people oppressed. That is literally what it is for. So to then be like, a kinder, gentler carcerality, no, okay? Sonia Renee Taylor of The Body Is Not an Apology, when she's talking about this country and its oppressive systems, she uses the analogy of baking a cake, and she's saying like, well, you can't unbake the cake once you've baked it. If you put too much milk in it, you can't take that out. You're gonna have to throw the cake out. So we gotta throw this out.
This moment that we've been in the last couple of years following the uprising after the killing of George Floyd has really been about trying to redefine how we produce public safety.
When we say abolish the police, we are saying we do not want policing as we know it to exist anymore.
What's going to happen if we don't have a basic change in policing? We're going to continue having carnage in the street. America has never been a place where we had democracy and equality and freedom and liberty for all and justice for all, and all we have to do is get back to that.
Abolition just is, when you put your money where your values are. So you're investing in care, right? You're investing in resources for communities. And that sounds, it sounds common sense, but it's not how we're doing things now, right? We've defunded education. We took a hammer to education 50 years ago, and we're living the end result of that.
It's a whole shift though, right? We see the connection. It's a whole shift from punitive, controlling, I know what's best for you, into this reversal where it's like, what can I do for you? What do you need? I think I know what can help you based on what you've shared with me. And not having forms of control that are kind of watching you all the time. Ankle bracelets, helicopters, cameras, probation officers. That's not needed if you have, again, this safety net, these people that are gonna hold each other accountable to do better,
What kind of bugs me sometimes is that people take offense to the concept of defunding the policing, but we felt very comfortable when we started defunding public health in this country. We've become very comfortable with defunding public education and continue to do so, right? I mean, per capita, when you adjust for inflation, our investments in education, public education, are abysmal when compared with other industrialized nations in the world. So we have defunded all sorts of, safety nets, if you will. We have less public housing per capita today than we did in the 1980s. And people wonder, why is homelessness such a peak? Not only is it an issue of affordability, but we actually have taken a lot of public housing out of stock, right? So there's been a lot of defunding going on for years about a lot of other systems, and a lot of that funding shifted to policing, prisons, and prosecutions. And I think that to the extent that we need to right-size the criminal legal system and move some of that funding into some of these other areas, I think it's critical that we have serious conversations around that. And when you do that, you're not giving up safety, you're increasing the likelihood of safety. But to get rid of policing altogether, or even to shrink it to the point that they become totally ineffective, I totally disagree with that.
So we wanted public engagement, and we really pushed for that. So me and then the committee of people I was working with, which included Taria Jadi, Harry Critchley, who's now on the police board, which is interesting, Jen Taylor, Julia Rogers, and then we had a larger group of people from different community groups. So I think it's perhaps unique. I like to think so. And I think one thing that's unique about it, that it was commissioned by a board. So, I think that's interesting that it's an official report. But B, that we really did try to a bit more fine grained, like get into what does it look like, because we've been saying it's not new, the demand to defund the police. The Panthers had it in their 10-point plan, right? But it's one thing to say remove money from the police and give it to housing. It's another thing to talk about how would that take place? Like who would be involved in that? What level of government would that be? What would that look like? So we did public engagement. We had almost 2,500 surveys that people returned, where we asked about things like their view of public safety. So we asked them about the police, but then we also asked them things like, what in your community what resources do you think keep you safe? And people said like libraries or sports or whatever, right? So trying to think about what public safety really means to people. And then in our report, we not only dealt with the issue of defunding, but we treated it as a kind of holistic idea. So our definition is really 4 pillars that move from internal issues like police governance, policy, police boards, all the way out to things like participatory budgeting in cities. Because of course, if we're talking about defunding the police, how do you allocate that money? So we were talking about how when people actually have a say over the budget and get to say, where, if we take this money from the police, where should it go? If you do a process with people in communities, say, I think it should go to this group because we all access them. We use this group when we're in trouble. That actually engages people in the political system and shifts also how we feel about our position in democracy. So we really go from the inside all the way out. We tried to really create a kind of complete roadmap. We did 36 recommendations, everything from, addressing use of force to like simple stuff like the police policy should be available online so we can access them. So we tried to do some of that kind of policy-based work to show that this wasn't ponies and fairy dust, that this is very practical. Very quickly, so the first pillar deals with things like police governance, police boards, making policy public, transparency, accountability. The second pillar, which is really the heart of defunding, is detasking. And some people don't like the term defunding, and if you don't like it, detasking might be the term for you. And that's simply removing tasks that the police are not equipped for or not appropriate to, and putting them in the appropriate agencies. So that includes things like, of course, the main one is mental health response. This is something that even people who oppose defunding of the police agree that the cops should not be on mental health calls. And this includes the cops, by the way. Police themselves say they're traumatized by these calls, that they don't have the training and they don't know what to do. So that's a really obvious one. Cahoots is a model in Oregon that a lot of people are using, which is cop-free mental health. So that's the most familiar, most basic kind of idea of detasking. Like, let's not have the cops come. Another example is things like sobering centers, that the police should not be involved in health issues of addiction. They're not trained doctors. If someone's intoxicated in public, they should be going to a site where there's medical personnel, not into police cells where they often asphyxiate on their vomit and die, right? So that's all part of detasking. And of course, that can be as small as just things like mental health, or as broad as abolishing the police, right? Depending on what you believe in. And then our third piece was around things like legislative and regulatory reforms and changes. So that has to do with a lot of the different levels of government involved and the different ways that you're dealing with police. And then finally, our fourth piece was around finances. So participatory municipal budgeting, so people having a say over what happens to their budget, but also things like putting money into affordable housing, putting money into like a proper decriminalization plan, putting money into treatment, stuff like that. So then we really looked at community groups and distributing financing.
What abolitionists are arguing for is not that we somehow magically eliminate all police tomorrow. First of all, it's not possible. That can't happen. So why waste our time imagining what would happen if all of a sudden there were no police? Because We don't have the political power to do that, and it's not even what people are demanding. What we want is to see new investments in community-based strategies to address people's real problems in ways that allow us to reduce our reliance on policing.
When we say defund the police, we're saying defund the police, invest in the people. Crime is caused by desperation. Desperation is caused by poverty. So you have poverty, which feeds desperation, criminal behavior, also feeds mental health. You cannot talk about crime without talking about mental health, but people do it all the time. You cannot talk about crime without talking about poverty, but people do it all the time. There shouldn't be a war on crime. There should be a war on poverty.
Healthy resource communities are safe communities, and they feel safe. And they have a sense of restorative justice just by nature of being healthy resource communities. You know, I've even been in a police commission meeting where this sitting chief of police said, the safest way to live is to know your neighbors.
You get resources to those places. You know, you stop pumping more money into the bloated punishment bureaucracy. Here in LA, it's $3.2 billion. It's over that now, over $8.2 million every day that we're pumping into the police department, just LAPD. Lots of that could be going to housing, to doing something about the crumbling schools. That's criminogenic. You want to reduce crime, help kids get high school diplomas that are worth something. You know, allocate resources to that rather than to this bloated police department.
And I'm a practical abolitionist, right? Like, I mean, I actually do work in prison, so I deal with people every single day in prison. I always say life is long, you know, quite literally in prison. A life sentence is a long sentence. And any time you're working in prison, you have to, with prisoners or organizing with prison, nothing happens immediately. You know, somebody's wrongfully convicted, you can all know it, and it's still going to take years to get that person out. So you really have to take the long view, I think. And then, you know, we're not ready. I always say this too, that this is something that Dr. Rachel Zeller says as well. Like, even if aliens came down tomorrow and zapped every prison and removed every police force, like, we ain't ready. We don't know how to deal with conflict. We haven't organized ourselves to deal with harm. Harm is real. The Black woman who invented transformative justice didn't invent it as a method because they were naive about harm. They're all victims of sexual violence and childhood incest, and they understood that the systems that we have, the court systems and police, actually do nothing to end gender-based violence or domestic violence or rape, right? That has to come from social change, and it has to come from educating each other, intervening. But, you know, we're not capable of that yet because we live in a policing society where we're taught to defer all problems to the police. Like, that's supposed to be our first call. So do you know what to do if someone in your apartment building is experiencing abuse and you don't want to call the police? Are you organized? Do you have a group of people that's trained in that intervention? Where would you take that person who's being abused? Do you know where a safe place is? Do you know where the shelters are? What if the shelter's full? What if they're not picking up the phone? How do you go and do that intervention? These are things that we need to train ourselves in.
When you begin to think differently and you begin to look at people through the eyes of the humanity in all of us and, you know, sort of that love for humankind, your thinking and your approach to the work starts to be very different, right? I mean, we may be unhappy with our kids, right? We may not like a lot of the things that they do. But intrinsically, most of us come from a place of love, and therefore our interventions and the way that we deal with the stuff we don't like is generally going to be influenced by that love, right? And that caring. If we take the same approach to our neighbors and other communities that do not necessarily look like we do, then the approach to the work is, it invariably will take a different turn. And I believe deeply in the concept that bringing love to the equation, and not in a simplistic way, but love love for humankind, love for humanity. I think that when you do that, you begin to alter your way of how do you resolve those annoying things and those things that we don't like and those things that, quite frankly, could be harmful.
What people don't realize when we're talking about abolition is that we're really talking about the fact that we want you to be a decent person, that it's going to require that you relate to people, that you have conversations with people, that you talk to your neighbor and don't call the police on them and stop being passive aggressive, which is going to require that you actually deal with your trauma and your baggage that got you actually dysfunctional in your personal relationships and not able to set boundaries, like all of that. And so I think that's a part of the secret, and we haven't tapped into that in abolition and in racial justice. So we're having these conversations that are very cerebral and in our head, and we're talking about policy and how you vote and all of this other stuff. And what I am asserting is that, like, you have to get yourself together and understand why you are so invested in revenge, punishment, you know, why you need to bully your children, why, you know, all of this, and why you need to feel like you're better than someone else, or what made you feel small, what hurt you and harmed you, and so now you have to, you know, police other human beings.
We're here at our location in the South Bronx, blocks away from where our founding members grew up. This is Wildflower New York Charter School. It's a Montessori school. It's the only true Montessori school in the Bronx. It's very special. When you talk to people who are from affluent backgrounds, right, they went to Montessori schools and their mouth always drops when I say we have a Montessori school, because it's like you're teaching these methods to kids in the Bronx for free. You know how much my parents spent on a Montessori education, so that's huge for us. When we talk about our heroes, you know, our kids are looking at Fred Hampton. Our kids are looking at Angela Davis and Assata Shakur. Their learning experience is definitely different. So what we have is 5-year-olds, kindergartners, who are doing multiplication. It's exceptional. A lot of things that Black Opportunities does are modeled after the Black Panther Party, because we feel as though they had the right idea. The Black Panthers were a bottom-up revolutionary organization, meaning they fought to seek change in their communities, and then they fought higher level fights for the people. But they were revolutionaries, you know, they were abolitionists. That's who we are. We teach community, because you know how wolves run in pack. They take care of each other, they hunt together, they eat together, they do everything together. We're trying to teach that at a very basic level. You know, if you look at where the Wildflower Charter School is, we're in the heart of the hood. Not even 2 blocks, not even a quarter of a mile away, there is 10, 12 blocks of project buildings. There's 40,000 impoverished people concentrated in a space that is, I don't know if you know, 10, 12 city blocks. We serve those people, we feed those people. We go in and clean out the staircases. We have summer youth workers, which is about 10 young people who are paid by the city to work in businesses. We take them out and show them how to report hazardous or dirty conditions in these communities, and the city responds to it. It's not that our people aren't concerned about what's happening to them, they just don't know how to fight back. And we do, so we're gonna help them.
In abolition, when people's needs are met, people don't need to go into other communities and steal, right? Restorative justice models are popping up all over the place. The most successful one I think I've seen is in Chicago. And part of that is because they also have interrupters in Chicago, right? They have violence prevention workers that will go out before a crime is being committed. Like, people will call, they're grandmamas, right? These are women who, again, because they garner a certain amount of respect and and are able to go in as folks are fighting, as something is happening, and de-escalate, diffuse things, right? You're actually able, I don't know if it's still running, but you were able to choose a restorative justice path if you were a victim of a crime in Chicago.
So what is restorative justice?
I think there are a lot of definitions out there, so I don't want to be the sole kind of provider of the definitive answer to that. But to me, restorative justice is a second chance. You know, restorative justice is also a way for, you know, typically what you'll see is a person who has committed a harm and someone else who has been affected by the harm caused to have a dialogue, have a discussion, and for that opportunity to be that person that committed that harm to make amends, to repair as much as possible, to give back, and more than anything, really understand what they've done and try to change, you know, their behaviors. But I think it's all, again, tied back to giving dignity back and humanity back to that person that's committed a harm and not imposing punitive sentences on them or a harsh kind of punishment. It's about, you know, giving them the chance to really come into contact with this other person and see them as a human being, hear their story. And so it's also a chance for that person that was harmed to have a say in what this other person can do to make things better, you know?
The biggest question I'm asked about abolition is, what do we do with violent offenders, right? That's what keeps coming up. I'm deep canvassing at doors in white neighborhoods, and almost everybody can agree that our carceral system does not work. Jail is not a solution for our social problems anymore. You know, that's not making us any safer, any healthier. But this violent offender piece keeps coming up. And if you've ever talked to folks, victims of violent crimes, they're seldom made whole by the system we have now. In fact, they're often traumatized again and again, especially victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. Like, they're more than not believed, not taken seriously, certainly not aided in any way by our system. That's one of the things I'd like to see all of our movement partners and our folks on the ground who are pretty much doing the city's job now. We need to start building those new systems of care, because if we can show folks what we'll be replacing it with something tangible, you will have more and more people on our side. And our campaign definitely should prove that point, because I had no name recognition. I got in on the last day and I had no money. And we still took 7% of the vote and tied a sitting city council person who was in state assembly. So, you know, there is an appetite for this. There's an appetite for this change.
This is not some kind of abstract utopian envisioning. This is a very practical, programmatic intervention. So if we really want to save lives, one of the things we could do is to send someone other than police, to send trained mental health workers, outreach workers, social workers, often together as an outreach team who can respond to someone in crisis. A number of cities are doing this now, from Eugene, Oregon, to Denver, Colorado, to Houston, Texas. This is working. They're diverting 911 calls, no one's getting arrested, and no one is getting killed in these encounters. And in Denver, where they've had a very robust program for over a year now, they've not requested police assistance a single time on these calls.
On an individual level, this is what my abolition starts at home. It starts with my children. So some people that might have a problem with this, I did not teach my children to call the police. We do not do that. And I put systems and tools in place so that they don't have to call the police. If I pass out, they can call Nana. They can contact their uncle. They can call the neighbor. They don't need to call the police. If we need to do a wellness check, or whatever. We don't need to bring the police out here for this situation. We can do this as a community and teaching children what is appropriate. I had a neighbor that was killed by Inglewood PD about 15 years ago. And he was having a mental health crisis. He was spiraling. We all saw it happening, but we didn't know what to do. And I think about the fact that he would be alive if somebody had just called his mom. But we didn't have her contact information. So we are going to have to talk to one another. We're going to have to be neighbors. We're going to have to get uncomfortably close. And at minimum, know who people belong to. Know who your mama is and your cousin is. And have their contact information so that if something is happening, that we can call them. Or that if there's some suspicious activity at the house and I know you're on vacation, that I can reach out to this person and they can come and check on it, or that I have the authority to come and look, as opposed to calling the police for every single thing. And I think that it's home by home, family by family, building by building, block by block, community by community, coming together to say, instead of calling the police, we call each other, we create a phone tree. And if the kids are in the alley making too much noise past midnight, we got people that will come and say, okay, now that's enough. It works. It works. It's actually working, not just with nuisances and minor instances, but in life or death situations.
A lot of where I'm coming from is the importance of theory, of frameworks, of big pictures when we're approaching these problems so that we are resilient when the inevitable happens. For instance, when we enact criminal justice reform on a mass scale, there will be some cases in which people who receive this less retributive treatment, less punitive treatment, are going to get out sooner than they otherwise would have and are going to hurt somebody. They're going to commit a crime. And sometimes it may be a very serious crime. By the same token, we know that any policy we pursue is going to have risk associated with it. And when those risks are realized, we have to have a response. We can't let that that outlier become the basis for fear-mongering. We have to say, yes, there's a price we're going to pay as a society to be more humane, to be more just, to be more fair. But fairness has a price. Freedom isn't free, right? Equality isn't free.
And criminality is constantly being redefined and changing based on the whims of white supremacy. And so what separates me from a criminal? Nothing. Nothing. And so what I want to say is that we really need to think a little bit more collectively and individually about the language that we're using and the way that, again, we use certain terms and language to really other people.
One of the things I like to talk about is, we love this language of imagination. And I know why, but I sometimes think we should move away from it. We go imagine the world because then we make it sound like it's only imaginary. And in fact, it's very practical. In COVID in my province, in the first wave of COVID, we let out 41% of provincially incarcerated people. So nearly half. And there was no crime wave. It costs almost $300 to keep people in jail for one day, and it costs $125 to put people in fully supportive housing with access to social work, groceries. And so we point to that and say, that was practical, that happened. That's not something we imagined, that actually happened. We effectively decarcerated almost half our population. So if we can do it, it shows you that prison is the myth. Like, the myth is that we need all these people in jail while they'll be running around the streets, and that's not true. So I really try to shift us from believing that defunding is radical to recognizing that what is actually radical is investing billions of dollars into policing. What is radical is giving police force tanks and semi-automatics, and like in the States especially, where you give them like discarded weaponry, like decommissioned weaponry, like literally from the war in Iraq. Like, that is radical. It is radical to defund your education and healthcare system so that you can't even have like people in the emergency room during COVID, or like enough nurses in the long-term care homes. So you had people working in multiple homes spreading COVID, and that's why so many of our elders died. That is radical. To get rid of the social compact that has existed for generations and strip all of that, and then fill the gap by just funding the police more and more, giving them SWAT teams, or as we call them, ERT teams, giving them that, giving them more weapons, giving them more powers, increasing what they do, like involving them in schools. It's extremely radical to have your child going to school and have a cop there. Like, we should recognize that as a radical social shift. That's not the status quo. So I really push us to talk about that, to like not agree that defunding the police is this radical lefty, like communist, Marxist, whatever, that it's actually practical, it's good social policy, it makes sense, and here's a roadmap to it.